My daughter shifted uncomfortably in her chair as she said, "He's just my dad," and I could feel every eye in that glass-walled office in downtown Chicago turn toward me. I was 62 years old that morning in October 2021, standing there in a jacket I'd owned for 14 years, holding a paper folder that suddenly felt heavier than it should have. I'm a father of one, a widower for the past 9 years, and a man who learned a long time ago that respect isn't something you ask for, it's something people decide you don't deserve before you ever speak. And I want you to understand something, that moment didn't begin in that office. It had been building for years, quietly, piece by piece, until it arrived right there between polished floors and quiet judgment. Her boss had asked who I was. Simple question. But the answer she gave, told me everything I needed to know about how she saw me. Not as the man who raised her on $38,400 a year after her mother passed. Not as the one who sat through every late-night fever and every early morning exam drop-off. No. Just an embarrassment. That word wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It landed softly, and that made it heavier. Have you ever been reduced to a single word in a room where you once meant everything? Because in that moment, I realized something most men never say out loud: sometimes the people you give your life to, slowly forget the life you gave. I didn't argue. I didn't correct her. I didn't even clear my throat. I simply stood there, hands steady, eyes calm, while the room made its quiet assumptions about who I was and what I had become. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own child's world, you already know how loud that silence can be. What happened next, I never expected. What I am about to tell you, I never told anyone, because the moment my daughter called me an embarrassment in that office, it didn't just happen there, it echoed backward through years I thought we had survived together. The room smelled faintly of fresh coffee and printer ink, that sterile corporate scent that makes everything feel temporary, even people. Her voice had been light, almost practiced, like she needed it to sound casual. "He's not really involved in what I do," she added, adjusting the sleeve of a blazer I knew cost more than my monthly mortgage used to. "And I want you to understand something, humiliation doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it's quiet, polite, and final." I remember gripping that folder tighter. Inside it were documents, old ones, worn at the edges, but not a single person in that room would have guessed their value. Not when they saw me. Not with my shoes slightly scuffed, the same pair I'd resold twice instead of replacing. You see, when my wife passed in June 2012, I had exactly $847 in my checking account. That was it. $847 to raise a 16-year-old girl who deserved the world. And I gave her everything I could. Everything. But somewhere along the way, the sacrifices became invisible. The late shifts. The skipped meals. The nights I stayed awake just to make sure she got home safe. None of that walked into that office with me. Only the version of me she had decided to present. Have you ever sat in a room where your entire life was quietly rewritten in front of you, and you weren't invited to speak? Her boss hadn't said anything yet. Just watched. Observed. Measured. And my daughter, she gave a small, apologetic smile in his direction, as if to excuse my presence before I had even opened my mouth. And that was the moment I understood something that settled deep in my chest: the man she was trying to distance herself from, was the same man who never once walked away from her. Nobody warns you that being a good father can feel like disappearing in slow motion. I looked down at that folder one more time, and realized they had no idea what was already set in motion. That folder in my hands, they all thought it was just paper. I didn't speak. Not then. The air felt colder than it should have. Offices like that always do: too much glass, too much light, not enough warmth. I could hear the soft hum of the ventilation system above us. A quiet, steady sound. Like a reminder that everything in that room was controlled. Measured. Calculated. Except what I was holding. I shifted my weight slightly. My fingers brushed the edge of the folder. Smooth. Worn. Familiar. I had carried it through airports, through bank offices, through buildings much taller than this one, just never like this. Never while being looked at like I didn't belong in the room. And I want you to understand something, silence isn't weakness. It's often the moment a man decides exactly who he's going to be next. My daughter avoided my eyes. That part stayed with me. Not the word she used. Not the room. Just that small decision, to look away. So I let the silence sit. I let it grow. Have you ever chosen not to defend yourself, not because you couldn't, but because you knew something they didn't? The boss finally leaned back in his chair. Leather creaked. Soft. Expensive. He studied me now, not casually anymore. Something had shifted, though no one had said a word. I took a breath. Slow. Steady. Not to speak. To remember. 16 years old. That's how old she was when I promised her I'd never let her feel alone after her mother was gone. I kept that promise. Every day. Even when it cost me more than she ever saw. And in that moment, I realized something simple. I didn't need to prove who I was. I just needed to let them find out. Because some truths don't need defending. They need timing. If you've ever been underestimated, you already know, the quiet ones are the last to be understood. I loosened my grip on the folder. And waited. Because the next move wasn't mine. It was his. That moment, it didn't arrive with noise. It arrived with a chair moving. Her boss leaned forward first, then slowly stood up from behind his desk, navy suit, crisp white shirt, the kind of presence that usually makes other people sit straighter. But this time, it was different. The room shifted with him. Conversation stopped. Even the quiet hum above us seemed to fade. And I want you to understand something, respect doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes, it stands up. He walked around the desk. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just deliberate. Measured. My daughter turned slightly, confused, her expression tightening in a way I hadn't seen since she was a teenager caught off guard. "Sir," he said, extending his hand toward me, his voice steady, clear enough for everyone in that room to hear, "It's an honor to finally meet you." Silence. Not awkward silence. Not uncertain silence. The kind that settles when something undeniable has just been placed in the center of the room. I didn't rush to take his hand. I let the moment breathe. Then I did. Firm. Simple. Nothing more than necessary. My daughter blinked. "Wait, you know each other?" she asked, her voice no longer as certain as it had been just minutes ago. He turned slightly toward her, but his eyes stayed on me for a second longer before answering. "We've been in discussion since early September 2021, he said. "Your father owns the distribution network we've been trying to acquire." You could hear it then, the smallest reaction from across the table. A pen dropping. Someone shifting too quickly in their chair. One of her colleagues actually leaned forward, as if trying to confirm he had heard it correctly. And if you've ever watched someone realize they misunderstood everything, you know it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in pieces. My daughter's face changed first. The confidence. Then the certainty. Then something quieter, something closer to recognition. I opened the folder. Slowly. Placed the top document on the table. Not to prove anything, just to finish what had already been started. No speeches. No explanations. Just paper meeting wood, and a room that no longer saw me the same way. Have you ever witnessed a moment where one sentence rewrites years of assumptions? Because in that office, on that Tuesday morning in October 2021, no one said another word for a long time. And for the first time, my daughter didn't look away. That silence in the room, it didn't end all at once. It shifted. Slowly. Like something had been reset, and everyone was trying to find their place again. After that Tuesday in October 2021, things didn't explode into celebration or apology. They changed in quieter ways, the kind that tell you everything without saying much at all. And I want you to understand something: real respect doesn't arrive with words. It shows up in how people choose to see you after the truth is known. The meeting continued, but differently. Chairs were adjusted. Voices softened. My daughter spoke again, but this time, she chose her words carefully, as if each one needed to be weighed before it left her mouth. At one point, she glanced at me, not quickly, not nervously, just long enough to acknowledge something had shifted between us. That was new. Later that week, she called me. Wednesday evening. 7:12 p.m. I remember the exact time because I let it ring once before answering. Not out of pride, just to steady myself. Her voice wasn't the same. No rehearsed tone. No distance. Just, quieter. "Dad," she said, and there was a pause I hadn't heard in years. I didn't know. I didn't correct her. I didn't remind her. Because the truth is, I hadn't done any of it for her to know. Have you ever waited years to be understood, only to realize that understanding doesn't undo what it felt like before it arrived? We met for coffee 3 days later. Same city. Different place. A small cafe on the corner of Wabash and Adams. She showed up early. That told me more than anything she could have said. She stood when I walked in. Not because she had to, but because something inside her had changed. We talked. Not about money. Not about business. Just about time. The kind we don't get back. The kind we assume will always be there until one day, it isn't. And if there's one thing I carried with me after all of it, it's this. I gained everything I had quietly built. But I never forgot what it felt like, when none of it mattered to the one person I built it for. Nobody talks about this part, how being a father sometimes means giving your whole life to someone who only understands it years later. So I chose something simple. Not distance. Not resentment. Just presence. Because some lessons don't need to be spoken. They need to be lived, again. If you've stayed with me this far, then you already understand, this was never about money, or titles, or proving anyone wrong. It was about something far quieter, and far heavier. The way a man is seen by the people he would give everything for. And I want to speak to you directly now, because maybe, somewhere in your life, you've stood in a room where your worth was measured too quickly. I was 62 when I learned this lesson in October 2021, but the truth is, it had been shaping itself long before that. We spend years building lives for others, making decisions they may never notice, carrying burdens they may never understand. Not for recognition. Not for applause. But because that's what we chose the day we became fathers, husbands, providers. And sometimes, that choice comes with silence. Not the kind that empties a room, but the kind that fills it, slowly, until one day, it speaks for you. The most powerful men I have ever known never raised their voice. They never demanded respect. They never forced their place in the world. They simply waited. So if this story reached something in you, something you haven't said out loud in a long time, then you're not alone. There are more stories like this. Stories of men who said nothing, and then changed everything. Subscribe. Because the next story, it may feel like it was written about you. Respect is revealed, not requested.